download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about cells. Cells can be prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Eukaryotic cells are complex and contain a nucleus. Their DNA is stored within the nucleus, whereas prokaryotic cells are much simpler. They're simple cells and they do not contain a nucleus. Their DNA is loose within the cytoplasm. Animal cells are examples of eukaryotic cells. That is because they contain a nucleus. I'm going to draw an animal cell for you here. Okay, so here I've drawn the cell membrane. This is on the outside of an animal cell, the cell membrane. And this controls what can enter and leave the cell. This bit here is the nucleus. We say that the nucleus controls the cell as it contains the genetic material. So it contains genetic material. Here I am drawing the mitochondria. Mitochondria. Now the mitochondria is where aerobic respiration happens in the cell, and this provides energy. So mitochondria is where aerobic respiration happens and it provides energy. Now I am drawing, as you can see here, something called the ribosomes. These are tiny and you cannot see them on a light microscope. You can only see them on an electron microscope. And it is where protein is made. So the ribosomes are where protein is made. And the final thing we need to look at in the animal cell is the gel-like substance all in the middle of the cell. All this empty space here. So we call that the cytoplasm. Now the cytoplasm is where most chemical reactions happen. So the cytoplasm is where most chemical reactions happen. So what I'd like you to have a go at now is to try and pause the video and see if you can label all of these structures and tell me their function. Okay, so hopefully you should have got that A was the cell membrane. And hopefully you remembered that it controls what can enter and leave the cell. B was pointing to a ribosome. And hopefully you remembered this is where protein is made. C is pointing to a mitochondria. And that is where aerobic respiration happens to provide energy. D is pointing to the cytoplasm. And that is where most of the chemical reactions happen. And E was pointing to the nucleus, which contains the genetic material and controls the cell. Now plant cells are also eukaryotic. So again, they contain a nucleus. I'm going to draw a plant cell for you here. So what I've just drawn there is not the cell membrane like it is in the animal, but actually the cell wall. Okay, so plant cells also have cell walls, and this provides structure and support to the cell. Okay, so plant cells also have cell walls which provide structure and support for the cell. Now I'm drawing this rather large structure here, and again this is something an animal cell does not have. We call it a permanent vacuole. So this here is a permanent vacuole. Now this contains cell sap, which keeps the cell rigid. Here I'm drawing the nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus. Now you'll remember that this is where the genetic material is stored and it controls the cell. These large structures here are actually chloroplast. Okay, so these large structures here are chloroplast. Now these are green structures, and it is where photosynthesis happens in the cell. So again, animal cells do not have these, but plant cells do. They also have mitochondria. Now, you have to note that these are smaller than the chloroplast. So the mitochondria are actually smaller than the chloroplast. And you'll remember that this is where aerobic respiration happens, which provides energy. Okay. Now you've also, in a plant cell, got these rather small structures, and you'll remember that they are called ribosomes. Now ribosomes are where protein is made in the cell. And you've also got the cytoplasm, okay, which is again that gel-like substance where most of the chemical reactions happen. So the gel-like substance where most of the chemical reactions happen, and that is our plant cell. So again, what I'd like you to do is pause the video and see from this diagram if you can label A through to G. Okay, so hopefully what you should have got is A was the cell wall, and that provides structure and support for the cell. B, the cell membrane, and that controls what can enter and leave the cell. C was the vacuole, and it contains cell sap to keep the cell rigid. D, you should have got the nucleus, which contains genetic material and controls the cell. E is actually pointing to a ribosome, and you'll remember that's where proteins are made. F is pointing to a mitochondria, and G is pointing to the cytoplasm. Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers, and so much more. The link is in the description. Okay, again what I want you to do is try and pause the video and try and fill in this table from whether you find this which particular organelle in animal and in plant cells. So just a tick or a cross, and whether you find it in an animal cell and then in a plant cell. Okay, so a nucleus is found in an animal cell, but it's also found in a plant cell. So you should have ticked both for that. A cell membrane is found in an animal cell and also in a plant cell. The cell wall is not found in an animal cell, but it is found in a plant cell. The permanent vacuole is not found in an animal cell, but is found in a plant cell. The ribosome is found in an animal cell and is found in a plant cell. The chloroplast is not found in an animal cell, but is found in a plant cell. The mitochondria is found in an animal cell and is found in a plant cell. And the cytoplasm is found in an animal cell and is also found in a plant cell. So you should be able to see that all of them are actually found in a plant cell, and most of them are found in animal cells, but not the cell wall or the vacuole, and not the chloroplast. Now what I want you to do is pause the video again and have a go at answering these questions here. Okay, so let's quickly run through the answers. Define the term eukaryotic cell. Well, you'll remember that it's a cell that a complex cell that contains a nucleus. They're the two important points to me making. So complex and contains a nucleus. List the structures found in a human cell. Well, us humans, we are animals, and therefore we have all the structures found in an animal cell. So you should have got the cell membrane, the nucleus, ribosomes, mitochondria, and the cytoplasm. What is the function of the nucleus? The function just means what it does. Now the nucleus contains genetic material and it controls the cell. So that's the answer. What is the function of the mitochondria? Well, that's where aerobic respiration happens, which provides energy for the cell. What three cell structures are found only in plant cells and not in animal cells? Well, for that you should have got the vacuole, the permanent vacuole, the cell wall, and the chloroplast. What cell structure is responsible for making proteins? That is the ribosome. What is the role of the chloroplast? Well, that is where photosynthesis happens in the cell. Question 8, true or false? All plant cells have a cell membrane. That is true. And finally, what is the role of the cell wall? That provides structure and support for the cell. So hopefully you got all 9 out of 9 on those. Now bacterial cells are prokaryotic. So you'll remember this means they do not contain a nucleus. So I'm going to draw one out for you now. Now bacterial cells have an outer layer, an outer protective layer called the slime capsule. And as I just said there, that acts as a protective layer for the cell. So slime capsule, which is a protective layer for the cell. And then if you go in one layer, they have a cell wall. And you'll remember from before that that provides structure and support for the cell. And then they have the cell membrane. Cell membrane. Now the cell membrane can control what can enter and leave the cell. Now in a bacterial cell, they do not contain a nucleus, so their genetic material is loose within the cell. So we call this loose genetic material. So loose genetic material. Now because it's genetic material, it controls the cell. It controls the activities of the cell. Bacterial cells also have these things called plasmids, which are drawn here. Now they are just a loop of DNA. So this here is a plasmid, and we just say it's a loop of DNA. Also, you have the cytoplasm. You'll remember that the cytoplasm is where chemical reactions happen. And you also have these rather small structures, which you'll remember are called ribosomes. Now this is where protein is made in the cell. So I want you to have a go at pausing the video and labelling each of these structures and also their functions, so what they each do. Okay, so with A, you should have got the slime capsule. Now the slime capsule is a protective layer for the cell. Moving in one, you would have had the cell wall, which provides structure and support to the cell. C is the cell membrane. Now this controls what enters and leaves the cell. D is loose genetic material. So it controls the activities of the cell. E is a ribosome. And this is where protein is made. And finally F is a plasmid. And remember, this is a loop of DNA. So for the last time, I want you to have a go at pausing the video here and just answering these questions. Okay, so number one, what is the difference between eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells? Well, the big difference is that eukaryotic cells contain a nucleus, whereas prokaryotic cells do not contain a nucleus. Question 2, give 2 examples of eukaryotic cells. Well, we've looked at 2 examples. We've looked at the animal and we've looked at the plant cell. So they're 2 examples of eukaryotic. Give an example of a prokaryotic cell. Well, we just looked at an example of a prokaryotic, and that is a bacterial cell, a bacteria. Why can't you see prokaryotic cells with a light microscope? Well, this is because they are too small. So they are too small to see with a light microscope. List all the structures that can be found in a bacterial cell. Well, we've got the slime capsule, the cell wall and the cell membrane. You've got the loose genetic material, you've got the plasmid, you've got the ribosomes, and you've got the cytoplasm. What is a plasmid? Well, we've just said that a plasmid is a loop of DNA. Question 7, what are 2 differences between an animal cell and a bacterial cell? 2 differences. So a bacterial cell has a cell wall, whereas an animal cell does not. So that's one difference. Bacterial cell has a cell wall, animal cell does not. A second difference is that an animal cell contains a nucleus, whereas a bacterial cell doesn't, as it's prokaryotic. A third difference could be that bacterial cells contain slime capsule, whereas animal cells do not. You also could have written that an animal cell contains mitochondria, whereas bacterial cells do not. So there's quite a lot of differences you could have written about here. And finally, question 8, where is the DNA found in a bacterial cell? Well, it's found in the cytoplasm. That's it for our rather long video on cells. You should have hopefully learnt the structure and function of all the organelles found in animal cells, plant cells and bacterial cells, and the differences between them. You can move on now to work your way through some exam questions and see how much you know on this topic, and you can also work through the quiz.